countdown, or you already going? You're already going. All right. Okay, let's get started. So this first part of our evening is actually a reserve workshop. So hopefully, in pure workshop fashion, I imagine that we're going to have really good conversation here tonight. Dr. Capron and I will lead the conversation. I'm certainly very hopeful that we engage you guys in a way that allows you to ask questions, that we will, on the fly, like work through some math with you and help you think through some of your thinking as we've had a chance to think through ours. But I want to set the stage just a little bit before we get started by just talking a little bit about your main role as a Board of Education really is the fiduciary responsibilities of the district. It's like one of the most important things that you guys do. So I'm going to put you on the spot to get started. You've all gone through school board training. So when I say fiduciary responsibility, should it be something that you learned when you were going through school board training, or something that you've learned since you've been a board member about your responsibilities to the fiscal side of what we do in a school? And what do you know your responsibilities to be?
Can you start us with an example? Get our
Get us. Well, I'll give you the most recent one. Like most recently, we
Pass the
go
budget.
and set a budget, right? So like
Yeah.
we know that that's part of our responsibility. What are some of your other responsibilities when it comes to the money? Other decisions that you make?
Well, I would say not just necessarily our decisions, but it's also to make sure that our district is handling the funds properly, that there's not one person in charge, that there's multiple checks, so that everything is accounted for and that we know it's going where it's supposed to go, and where we have said it should go.
So thinking even about your board packet, like what are some of the things that you've grown accustomed to seeing in your monthly board packets that show you some of our finances? To Becca's point, like what are you accustomed to seeing?
The warrants and all the
Right.
Yeah,
checks
so-
written out to who.
Everything that the district does in some way, shape, or form makes its way into your board packet for you to approve it, whether that's in a consent agenda or whether it's that in the actual agenda itself, there's a resolution where you are granting permission for, let's say, the superintendent to sign a contract, right? So anything that has to do with like the movement of money, the Board of Education is here for oversight to make sure that we are doing what we're supposed to be. So when we start to talk about the reserves are a component of all of our collective responsibility to the school district. So how do the reserves kind of play into that concept of financial stewardship? You're going to hear Dr. Capron and I tonight, hopefully engaging you guys around what the reserves do for us. They mitigate risk. They create stability. They provide continuity. They seed new programs. They give us the ability to absorb shock. So you know, even through the budget development process, like if we were going to try to take everything that could possibly become a shock to the system. If you're watching the news right now, you're probably hearing that the federal government has pulled back titles, was it 2, 3, and 4. So the federal government has pulled back their money around title grants 2, 3, and 4. What does that mean for us? For us, we're small enough that those are not the largest title grants that we get. So we're probably talking about close to maybe $30,000 across those grants for us. We actually predicted that those would be revenue for us in the next year's budget. Right now, they're taken out, so we will no longer count them as revenue. So we're talking about building a budget. We couldn't possibly have given a thought to where federal dollars might come or go, or state dollars and how they might come or go. So when we're building our budgets, we already know that there are risks within the budget that we've designed that we cannot mitigate by taxing the community. We wouldn't even know where to begin because we can't predict the risk. So when we kind of go through what the reserves are and the conversation that we're having, I'm going to keep coming back to this idea that without reserves, these are actually fundamental components of being good financial stewards that we would struggle to reach that goal. So if we don't have budgets that are stable, you basically impact the overall mission of the school district. Let's say, for example, every spring we weren't sure if we were going to be able to sustain programs, and so every spring we're pulling in 10 to 14 teachers and telling them that they might not have jobs. You know that happens in some districts. If we begin doing things like that, you challenge the board's mission to both hire and retain the best talented teachers, right? So everything about our decision making, the reserves allowing us to absorb shock, we get to go back to that fundamental mission of why we exist here and say that with reserves, we're able to mitigate some of these things. So they have a purpose and a function, and that's really what we're gonna discuss here tonight. Not just their function, but what's our comfort level with them. So Dr. Capron is gonna, I can pass them out, but we've created for you, and I shared a draft of this a couple weeks ago. We've done a little bit of refinement on it, but we're gonna give you a sample of what an updated reserve plan would look like for us as a school district. I think there's two there. Absolutely. So this document is going to give you a couple of things here. First of all, it's going to share with you down that left-hand column. We have two types of reserves. We have operational reserves and we also have capital reserves. You'll see the reserve name that we have. You're going to see all the finances around that, like what's in the actual reserve, what we had there last year, what we're predicting for the 25-26, which is something that you'll see there. And then you're going to see these bright yellow boxes. That's actually the conversation that Dr. Capron and I are going to have with you guys tonight. We're hoping to begin filling in these boxes collectively. Dr. Capron, would you like to add anything about how the layout?
Yeah, just the core part that in breaking it into those two areas, I think the bottom area, in the highlighted in the light blue and purple, is the capital reserves, which are a little bit different than the operational reserves. Those capital reserves are the ones that really focus on what we might be saving in future capital projects or bus purchases or vehicle purchases. Those are voter-approved reserves that already exist in the district. But the funding is the funding and how it's developed to fund going forward really ends up being largely a board decision.
So I think what I'd like to do to get started is we want to begin talking about those capital reserves. I would say, like in general, when you're talking about all the operational reserves, it starts to feel a little elusive. Where capital reserve, I think we can really kind of hunker in on some good examples around what this money goes toward and why we should be setting reserve targets the way that we're going to ask, that we're going to do here this evening. I want to start there because it's a very concrete example of how we might think about a reserve, how we use this particular reserve, and how we forecast what the reserve would have to have in it in order for us to maintain a really healthy reserve that will allow us to continue our capital projects and maintaining our facilities. So we're going to get started with that one. Dr. Capron, do you want to lead that?
Yeah, let me just pass out something here. So one of the things just to remember in the capital projects and the building projects has been that the goal, at least historically, in this project, the voters really, I think, appreciated that the district had the savings in the capital reserve to fund the local share of the capital project. So just as a reminder, when we do a voter-approved capital project, then the current building aid is about 85 cents on the dollar. So that for every dollar spent in construction, it really only costs the local taxpayers sort of 14 to 15 cents. So these capital projects are very economical, but even so, that local 15% of a project can add up to a significant amount. So we were looking at using estimates from our construction manager. We've really said, okay, we know that in the last capital project, we didn't get to do everything. Plus, we know that, the building, other things, roofs and flooring and everything else depreciate over time. So if in 5 years from the first capital project, the current one that's under construction, in 2028, we went out to vote for another capital project of a similar size. Due to construction inflation, that project would now go to from 15 million, just inflation would move it up to about a $19 million project. So if you wanted to have the local share of that project saved in 2028 to go out for a vote, you would want to save in your capital reserve $2.8 million. So what you can see is there's some money already in the capital reserve, but then that would mean that over the next 3 years, you need to put in close to $400,000 a year if you wanted to fully fund the local share of a capital project voted on, say, in 2028. Just for interest, just to share, if that's, those same assumptions were in place to do the same size project 5 years later in 2033, that project would be up to almost a $25 million project. And you need to save even more in the 5 years after the 2028 project to meet the goals of having the full local share of a project going forward. So planning out into the future and making a decision, hey, we would like for the community to have that local share saved, really fits into a reserve plan and then gets into the budgeting, the reserve plan, and the strategy for the district.
So a couple of questions that came up during the public hearing was, why are we doing another capital project? And I remember having to address a little bit that we are on a 5-year cycle. So we have a pattern in our capital projects that as a project starts to come off the books, we actually prepare to have a project come back on the books. Dr. Capron, can you explain why that's important for us?
One of the things that really fits and you'll see happen in some school districts that don't plan out as far is the fact that one of the options in doing a capital project is that the New York State tax cap allows you to take, and for every dollar of local share, if you don't save it ahead of time and you get it from a capital reserve, you can actually increase your tax levy to get it. So if the normal increase in the taxes was say 2 or 2.2%, but all of a sudden a capital project is coming on, maybe you go out at 4%, and that other 1.5%, say, or a little over 1.5%, will go on to the tax levy. And you'd still be under the tax cap to do it. But what can happen sometimes is it can be a surprise to the community. There's been historical times where districts have had not only challenges in their operations, so they're going out pushing their budget, but then all of a sudden the voters have forgotten that 3 years ago they voted to approve a capital project that they now have to start paying for, and all of a sudden they get surprised when maybe they get a tax levy of 5% increase or 6% increase.
So in order to stay predictable and consistent for the community, we actually need to build this reserve so that we can offset.
I mean, that's
that.
one of the, yes, building it in and being and anticipating how it may fit into the tax levy, and with the history of this district of wanting to save for that, you're right, it stabilizes the tax rate and keeps surprises away from the
Nobody likes
taxpayers.
surprises.
We don't like surprises,
Yeah.
then saving ahead of time is a good strategy.
Could you theoretically say you're going to go out at 4% in year one to begin or continue the build-up for the following project down the road, and then tell people on May 10th of year one that, look, next year it'll just be the usual 2%?
So let me see if I can answer your question in 2 parts. So yes, you can go out and
Well, you just suggested
once
that-
you build, say, an extra $100,000 into the levy to start paying for a capital project, you're right, the tax rate would restabilize at a high, but the levy would be at that higher rate. You can't necessarily go out ahead of time with that higher rate because you potentially be exceeding the tax cap regulations and have to get a super majority vote.
But didn't you just say that we would go out at 4%, for
Yes.
instance?
Yes, so
Can I ask a clarifying question? Are you sort of asking, like right now we're talking about the reserve and getting the local share over the course of time. Are you sort of asking what other ways could we fund the project besides doing it this way?
No,
Taxing for it?
I didn't want to be, it doesn't, in these days, moving forward, I believe I personally would find it very difficult to convince a community that we need an extra $100,000, which is 1.8%, because we're going to need it in 2 or 3 years. We all know that we're going to need it, but but it wouldn't. Would it be the same the following year?
I think that we just want to make sure I'm
Couldn't we
clarifying. You can't necessarily go out for that levy before you're actually paying for the capital.
Oh, all right, well, that answers.
Without exceeding the tax cap.
We had years, most of you were children, but we had years where the budget was minus. or it was zero.
Right.
And people still voted no, but.
No, when the tax cap legislation came into place, it really required, us some more long-term planning
Right,
than a case where, the voters could approve a budget in May, and then in August, you could set the levy. And it's whatever happened in between those, you have flexibility as a board to manage, but.
so we have
under
to
the
have a
tax cap-
project on the books ready to be voted on before we try to get more money prior to that to go for it, but not 2 years in advance.
No.
And also, when you think about it, we pay the local share, our local share, we get 85% back in aid over the course of 15 years, right? So if we don't have projects still going on, eventually we also have to plan for the revenue side to come back down, right? So there's also a portion of this equation that's like, okay, capital projects for us is, as much as this is not true at your home, if you did a capital project at your home, you weren't then gonna have the bank sending you back money every year and thanking you for taking out a home loan or taking out a line of credit to fix your
I
house.
think that is a very hard concept
It
for
is.
community members to understand. It's taken me years to understand that the way we run our district and the way we finance things is different than how I would personally finance my home.
Yes. So we sort of, for lack of a better way of saying it, to try to make it feel real, we kind of get a check from the state of New York that says, thank you for keeping your facility healthy. We get 85% of that capital project back. We fund just the local level. So the question that I hear when John is asking that is, there are other ways to fund a capital project. The way we've been lucky enough to do it as a district and are suggesting we continue, if the community can support that, if the board can continue to support it, is over the course of time, we've built very conservative budgets, which you're aware, our budget is very conservative. Then we manage the budget as more conservatively than the one we built. We try very hard not to have any waste. And then at the end of a year where we built a conservative budget, we really managed it tightly, we end up with fund balance. The fund balance goes into our savings accounts, which are our reserves. That's how we have funded the reserves for the most part over time, minus the money that we've seen in the reserves from the stimulus money that we got, right? We're used to our reserves being a lot smaller. It's the fund balance at the end of the year, not because we overtaxed, but because we had to prepare a budget that handles all sorts of factors that we don't know even exist yet. And at the same time, managing that budget very conservatively to come out on the other end with maybe $100,000, maybe $200,000, maybe $500,000, depending on how the year panned out. What we then do with that money is put it into the reserve. So that's one way to fund the capital project, is to build a reserve and have targets in that reserve that says, our capital project the next time is going to cost us this amount of money. We would do this if we were saving to buy a car. I want my car loan to be $300. I want this particular car. I have to put $7,000 down. It's going to take me 2 years to raise $7,000. Your reserve is kind of the same way. It's going to take us a full cycle, 4 to 5 years, to raise the money in the reserve because we have a conservative budget. To raise the money in a reserve that allows the capital project, the local share of it, to actually come out of our savings account. That's one way you can fund a capital project. You can also go out for a capital project and say to the voters, we are going to do a $15 million capital project and it's going to cost the voters, what did we say today, was it 4%?
$2 million, yeah.
We've got to raise the $2 million, so some districts do that. When you go out to vote for the capital project, they don't say at no additional cost to the taxpayer, they say at a 4% tax increase for the project. You vote on a budget, yes, and we levy. You vote on a project, yes, and they levy. Like there's other ways to do that. For us, we've been lucky enough that we've managed a budget, gotten fund balance, and been strategic about where we place the fund balance so that in our 5-year cycle, we don't go back out beyond our please approve our budget and say, hey, please approve this capital project with another tax increase. We don't do that at no additional cost. So I think that's where, in the reserve logic as a board, is like, is that where we want to stay? We know we're going to need to do capital projects, or we will, you're walking through, these roofs have been leaking for a couple of years. This roof is just now on the replacement cycle.
I don't want to go out to our community and ask for more money from them. If we can be strategic about our fund balance and putting it in a place where we can get work done in an aidable work done.
Yes.
No, I'd rather not go out and say we need 4% raise to do this capital
Yeah,
project.
definitely.
I want to build reserves for capital. But with that, we also build a conservative budget that is not built for a fund balance. The fund balance is sort of all these variables that we can't predict, right? That we built the budget to sort of make sure we can run a school district in the manner in which we've committed to the community. If there is fund balance, we're going to use that to fund the capital reserve or another reserve. I guess I want to be clear that our budget's conservative, one, and two, we're lucky to have fund balance after a conservative year in tight spending and making smart decisions. But it's not always the case. Sometimes our fund balance is much lower than others, and there's not a lot to put in there. It sort of depends. We've been able to do this.
It does depend. So when we did the public hearing, I made a comment right at the end to one woman who asked a question. I said, I hope that by the time we're done with this next year of talking about our budget more openly, how we develop what the reserves really are, that when you see our reserve plan and you see that we hit our targets, that you celebrate that we did that. But it is very true that we could set targets here tonight, even for the capital project. We could set a target and say that really in order, Dr. Capron and I have had this conversation. If we were to only plan for the next capital project and say, what was the amount we would need?
$371,000.
$371,000, right? We'd be
Yeah.
hopeful, right? At the
Yeah.
end of the year to be able to make that deposit. If we did that, that would be us only forecasting out one project, taking that reserve and depleting it all the way to zero. Then that next project is going to be
Starting from
$19 million,
scratch.
right? Or the next one up even bigger, right? So we can't get in when we start to set this target here today, I would like us to be thinking about the target for the capital reserve that not only prepares us for the next capital project, but also equalizes a little bit across the 10-year span, because we're going to struggle to hit a target of 370. To get to a 10-year span, you're probably talking of a target of, what is it? $500,000.
Right, you have an unfunded mandate that comes down through the state. You have special ed students that enter your district, and then you don't have
fund balance.
You don't have fund balance. It's that quick.
It's that quick. If we set it at the 500,000, because we're thinking of 10 years out, and trying to make sure that we're trying to equalize what that deposit should look like, you can imagine that at year 5 or 6 of this reserve plan, we would have to move that $500,000 up a little bit, right? To set the district up for 15 years from now.
Right, so when you're asking for the boards what are, where we're at with our comfort level and how much we're putting aside, I guess one of my questions is, in a year or two, if we're real low or real high, we're gonna even that out or make that right. You see what I'm saying? So like, say we fall on 500 just for the sake of an easy
Yes.
number, and we end up way under. Then we gotta move that up.
Or we acknowledge that when we go out for the next capital project,
Tax.
or it can't be that big,
Yes. Okay.
right? So this is definitely the largest capital project that we've done. And some of that is because we had the stimulus money that we were able to put into the capital reserve, which allowed us to have a bigger local share. So it's always been that the money that's in that capital reserve sort of drove that was our local share, so that drove how big the project could be. That is one way to do it, which in the end, to your point, Mrs. Dahl, that is what we have to do. Right? If our conservative budget at the end with fund balance never gets us to a year where we deposit $500,000, the board will not be surprised in 4 years when I say our capital project is only going to be this amount. Because it's all we can afford in our local share, and you'll know why. You'll know that you set the target at 500, but every year when we can't deposit it, that day that you vote on a resolution and move money into a capital reserve, If it's not $500,000, you and every community member that understands our reserve plan is gonna know we are not going to be chasing as much work in the next capital project. I don't imagine that the other option would be there. I don't think we would go out and say, we still wanna chase a $19 million project, and so
Right.
we're gonna have to collect more taxes, right? We would have to take our project, just like we did for this one, and say, we can't afford to do these 3 things, so they're off. We would have to really hone in on the next capital project and only the most essential components. We're lucky to be touching some instructional spaces. I'm excited that our auditorium is gonna get a facelift. We've gone years without the auditorium getting a facelift. I think it's been the conversation in the last 2 capital projects. It hasn't made its way in. This capital project got a little bit bigger because we had some stimulus money in that reserve. We now have a project that's gonna take on the auditorium. When we're making decisions about the auditorium right now, I'm very thoughtful. This might be the last facelift the auditorium gets for 30 more years. So we want to be strategic about what we're doing in there and be really thoughtful with it. So let's go back to the document that Dr. Capron just gave you with like the finances on it, which are a little dense. You have your copy over there?
I have a question before you
Yes.
go. So you've admitted, I don't mean admitted in a bad way, but you've been saying that this capital project that we have now is larger than other ones we've had because we've had stimulus money. Okay. So does that necessarily mean that in 5 years we need to have as big a capital project? Will there be that many more things that have to be done?
There are definitely things that needed to be done in this capital project that we did not do.
Okay.
So, but I think that's probably true always,
Mhm.
that the capital project never covers everything. So we do every 5 years, we also do a building condition survey.
Okay.
And in the building condition survey, the architects and engineers will actually tell us everything that needs to be addressed. And then we will go through and rate those things based on their priority. And your capital project is then really designed around the priority ones, the sort of most pressing issues that we have. Like the failing boilers at the elementary school is a very pressing issue. The failing windows at the elementary school is a very pressing issue. They're going to be addressed in this capital project. We were able to pick up the auditorium because we did a larger project. So your question I'm hearing is, let's say we use the calculations that Dr. Capron gave you, where the next project is going to be $19 million, and then the next one up was 20, I don't have it in front of me. I'm like guessing, I'm 23. So you might say, well, if this was the largest project, we could drop ourselves back down, I think is what I hear you saying.
Yeah,
So we
right.
went out at 15, our last project was probably 12. If we hung around the 12 instead of the 15, you could drop us a couple $1 million. So to your point, yes, the deposit we would then have to make into the reserve would be smaller. But we're always leaving work on the table in terms of the capital project.
And maybe I could just
Go ahead,
add
the
that
depreciation.
when you look at the total value of the total square footage of the building, and you look at the lifetime of our roofs and windows and floors and finishes and things, this spending is not even quite keeping up with depreciation. So the next project still will have plenty to do, and we'll still be trying to address priority lists. So, even if these projects keep up, and again, the only reason the projects that are going up in value is really because, currently campuses review the state of construction, and their figure is typically to assume construction inflation of 5% a year. So that's why, when that compounds, is why a $15 million project becomes a $19 million project. And so if you start backing off on the size in the future, you're going to be just giving less wood.
I guess what I'm just thinking is sort of almost a little bit like what you're saying, is the community may say, gee whiz, I've been in my house for, however many years, and, yeah, I probably need a new roof, but, and here I'm coming by and seeing that, anyhow, saying, I can't afford it, can we, is this being not extravagant,
Necessary.
but, you're just saying, is it really
Is it
necessary?
Nice to have, or
Yeah.
do we need it?
Yeah, that's what
You know what, I think that's fair. I feel like I heard that from the community too.
Mhm.
How much of what we're asking for is, we really need it, and how much is it would be really nice to have that.
Yeah, Yeah, and that's, I guess that's what I'm.
Yeah.
And I think part of the message around the capital project is really, part of the goal of this is to not only keep the facility operating well, but at the lowest possible cost to the taxpayer.
Right.
Where by planning it as a building project and getting building aid on it, you get that huge leverage coming up 85 cents on every
Right.
dollar coming from the state. Where if you ignore things that are on your building condition surveys, and all of a sudden you have a failure, they may say, you knew about this. It was on 10 years ago building condition surveys, and you didn't do anything. It's a repair bill that the district has to pay the
With no aid.
whole amount without aid.
Wow, that would be
So-
horrible.
And without the ebbs and flows, right? No spikes,
Right,
and it's predictable.
yes, exactly.
So
Right.
yeah, going back to why we have reserves, right? We want to create the stability like straight across the board. But I think with the setting the target, what I hear you guys saying is, even if we were to, let's say we use Dr. Capron's numbers and we say, well, we would have to set the year-end deposit into that reserve at $500,000. What are the chances that we hit that? So
Yeah.
what you're saying is, we probably can't actually afford a project this size. I don't disagree with you. I think in the end, the conversation around, that's what this means. Like, when we don't make deposits into that reserve, that means we're actually dictating the size of the project, which means when people say, that cost a lot of money, and why didn't we do it sooner? Or, you've probably heard the same thing as I've heard since I got here, why is the auditorium never getting updated? Well, we do need the community to help us sort of adjust around, is that a priority to the community? Because we heard that it's a priority to the community. We luckily got it into this project. If it had not made its way into this project, we all would have gotten a phone call that the auditorium was still not being addressed, right? So we know that there are members of the community that have that concern. So we have that challenge too. How do we figure out what the community really values and what they really want us to do that they think is essential to know, but essential to have, not just a nicety. There's also this balance of, and I'll use myself as an example, I traded in my Jeep. I loved my Jeep. I'm going to tell you why I did not want to trade it in. I did not want a car payment. But have you ever driven a car that doesn't have a car payment? You can do that for some time. And then what starts to happen? The day I made the decision that I could no longer drive the Jeep, it's because I was on the side of the road in Pavilion, and I had to call my husband to come and get me. I have to have stability. I have to be able to get back and forth to work. I don't want to be on the side of the road. All of a sudden, that cost-benefit analysis kicked in, and I said, I'm going to have a car payment. Thinking about our facility kind of in the same way, if we're not doing large enough capital projects, everything starts to nickel and dime us. We're spending a lot of money to fix things that just need to be replaced, and now you're sort of wasting on the other end because we're spending so much time and energy and resources and budget to take care of those boilers. Really, they just need to go. And so capital projects do have that component too. We have to, or we'll spend the money on the other end. Throw a figure out. What do you think? If we were going to set a target in this reserve and say, if we had fund balance and we were able to put money in this reserve at the end of every year, how much money should we put in there? You've got two numbers in front of you. You've got a 5-year out that puts us at 371, did you tell me?
Yeah, 371 to get in 3 years to get to the amount you need for the next project. And then 771, which was 700,000 something, that gets you to fully fund not only the next project, but, I mean, that is the amount it would take to get from 2028 to 2033, and the average of those is the 500,000.
And you're looking for a number just for capital projects?
I am.
Not for any of the other?
Not for any of the other
laundry
things.
list of things the reserve could be used for?
Correct. Just this reserve. Why it exists, what we would use it for, and what's a good target. We're not, first of all, let me say this, we're not stuck to this number.
That's what I was trying to
Yeah,
ask.
we're not stuck to the number. We may fall short, we may go over, we may adjust. Really, all that's going to mean is the size of our capital project is changing at the end of every year, which it's been doing anyways. But without saying to the public, that fund balance deposit into this particular reserve impacts the size of our capital project, allows us to chase this amount of work, allows us to do the things that the community values, Without doing that, I feel like what I heard from the community was, what is that reserve? Why do you have it? We were overtaxed. So I'm trying to get us out of the reserve template that we currently have on our website, which is good. It meets the legal requirement, it has everything that we need, but it doesn't set a target. So there is no way to say to the community, or in an open session, let's say a board meeting with a resolution where we ask you to approve moving $200,000 into the capital reserve. When you vote on that, and there's discussion, part of that discussion should now become, ooh, we didn't meet our target. That means the size of the next capital project is probably not going to keep up with inflation. What should we do about that? Are we concerned about that in this moment? When we do our next building of our budget, should we actually attempt to collect a little bit? And the same way that we say, like, what are our costs going to be, and we say to the community, we know we have to fund these things, do we eventually get to a point where we say, and also we would like to raise $100,000 to get into a capital project, we're still only going on to approve this budget at 2.3%, but please know 100,000 of that is earmarked because we'd like it to become fund balance because we'd like to move it in strategy. But you can speak to it. We know why we're doing it.
You sort of have to, don't you? Ask for just a little more to say, hey, we're gonna use it for this, because if you don't, you don't. If you don't ask for it, you never get it. And if you don't put it away, you're that much farther behind.
Isn't
But I
that,
think, go ahead.
isn't that what I just asked 12 minutes ago, and I was told you can't do that?
So you can build, as long as you're under the tax cap, yes, you can set the budget. Assuming you want to keep your levy increase, there's two pieces to this. Can you have fund balance in a budget that is earmarked to move to a capital project? The answer is yes, you can do. You can move it into a capital reserve for a future capital project. You can't necessarily say, my tax cap was 2.3%, I'm going to make it 2.4% to get that extra money to move in. So once you've hit the tax cap, that sets what your voter threshold is for approving the budget. So if you want to keep the budget approval set with a simple majority vote, you just have to manage everything below the tax cap.
So then,
But that does allow you to take and say, gee, I have some, I found some savings within the budget. Maybe I've got some extra state aid that I didn't plan on. Because somehow we got some, or maybe some extra interest income from the interest on our other reserves. And so that extra revenue money I could allocate to go into a reserve account. So I'm sorry, yeah. So
I didn't understand that either, John. I'm sorry that I didn't pick
No,
up on
it's
that
just
what you were
that-
asking.
if you go back 20 years, all the times that we could have went out at the tax cap, we never did.
right.
What if we had?
Oh, yeah.
We might not be having this conversation right now. So that being said, is that any different than next year going out at the tax cap because we want to raise another $104,000 when they're going to say, you don't need to raise it, you already have it, because I don't, it seems like what you're saying is that we're going to try to do it in advance, which is what I thought would be a good idea.
Right.
But a couple minutes
And
ago,
sorry, I think I misunderstood. So if the answer is, if the board decides they want to make sure they stay below the tax cap, and you decide within the budget that there's savings or contingency, or maybe another source of revenue has gone up a little bit, then it's quite reasonable to say that, we're going to try and allocate money for the capital reserve.
Okay.
The other part is when you're managing risk, when we talk about the other part of the reserve, the operational reserves, some of those are set for managing risk and uncertainty. And maybe those uncertainties don't happen during the year, and so your budget does create some extra fund balance. Then you might allocate that to a capital reserve or some other reserve.
I do think something that the reason we're moving in this direction, at least that I'm trying to guide us in this way, I feel like what I heard the community say was they felt like they just didn't know. So I do think that if we were to say in a budget development that we didn't hit our target for our capital reserve, and this is money that we'd like to raise, and here's what it's gonna go toward, and here's what it means for us. I did not get the sense, and I could be wrong, I'll continue to seek feedback in the community and make sure I'm not missing the pulse here, but I did not get the sense that they were mad that, I mean, I had people flat out say to me, we're not mad that you have the reserves, we don't understand them and we'd like you to talk more about them. So I do think coming up with a reserve strategy where as a board, you're starting to say, this is why we have the reserve, we understand it from a legal perspective. We're gonna set a target around the deposit we'd like to see. We're gonna celebrate when we hit that. We're gonna talk about what it means for us when we don't. That with a plan that looks like this and with targets, goals basically that you're setting, you're gonna be constantly evaluating whether or not we're within our goals around our financial responsibilities or whether or not we're missing our goals and we need to begin to adjust the budget differently. But we're not married to the number that we put in this square. There's no vote on this. There's just, we need to start talking this way and come with dollar figures that sort of make sense to us and then begin to see, can we even do that? If we set the target just in this reserve alone, let's say at the $500,000 mark, it's the only reserve we're going to fund ever. Is that realistic? We're not asking that question tonight. Tonight I'm just asking, if we just think about the capital project and when we know about depreciation, what's a healthy number to put in that box? And we're not married to it. But what's realistically the best number to put in there if we were really going to be financially managing the district's asset, the largest one, our facilities?
I think the middle, somewhere's in the middle,
Give me a number.
500. I don't know that we're gonna be able to do that.
I don't disagree with you.
And we're not gonna build a budget to do it, right? We're gonna build a budget to serve our students in that year.
Yes.
If we so happen to be lucky enough to have a fund balance at the end, it would be nice to be able to put 500,000. We're getting ready for the next project in 2025, or 2030, and 35, right, a little towards that.
20. I have another question. Okay, so I'm just seeing your bar graphs. And the bar graph looked like the capital reserve had a lot in it.
It did, and then it didn't.
So how much of that can be sort of spread out over the next 5 years or 10 years?
That's actually this model that Dr. Capron built for you. So right now, I don't have that in front of me,
Yeah.
Dr. Capron.
Yeah, we have 1.75.
We have $1.7 million in there. So we did have our local share for this capital project to 2.8 million.
Okay.
So what you watch with the capital reserve is that it climbs over the course of 5 years, but when we go to pay for that project, we have to pull the local share.
Right.
You watch that reserve plummet. Well,
Sure.
we're lucky right now because we pulled our local share for this project. We could have done an even bigger project than what we did because we had a little bit more local share. But we knew we weren't going to see that kind of stimulus money again.
Right.
So this project already got right-sized to leave some money in the reserve. So the document that you have in front of you, if we were to collect using what's in the reserve right now and getting us to the local share for the next project, we would only need to deposit $371.
71,000, yeah.
$371,000.
Oh.
3 years.
Oh, okay, so you've already worked that in.
But that would take the reserve to zero,
Right.
Oh,
which we didn't do this time. We left like the 1.7 in there. So the question is, would we deplete the reserve all the way to zero, knowing that then that next capital project would be even bigger? So now we would have to go from 371 to, I think it was 700,
Yep.
right? Which we know we can't hit the 700 mark. That seemed like a lot. So when Dr. Capron shared that with me, I was like, whoa. Can we look at equalizing that? Can we take 2 capital projects, equalize it across 10 years, and give me an idea of what a healthy deposit would be so that when I'm no longer working, and maybe you're no longer sitting there, there's not other people that come along to be good financial stewards of the district and say, whoa, we can't do what they once did because they did not leave us anything to work with. So this mathematical model is actually us equalizing what that would cost over a 10-year period to try to make sure that we don't deplete the capital reserve all the way to zero and then have to really increase the amount of money that goes in it, because that would actually not create a stable budget.
right.
So we're trying to equalize it to
Okay.
maintain stability.
Okay, I was
Great
just trying to
question.
figure out
That
what
was a great question.
what happened.
Yeah, that was a great question. Great question.
What do other people think is a number that is acceptable?
I agree with that. You don't want too little, but you don't want to overdo it either.
If you set a goal of, say, 700, that's just setting yourself up for defeat. There's no, you'll say, well, we're never, even 350 might be ambitious.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think to attain a goal like this, people need basic definitions. They still, we're more familiar, we're more comfortable because we hear it and we hear it and hear it. But, you know, grandma at home sees, oh my gosh, they want all this money. Well, but what does it mean? What does this mean and what does this mean and what? Simple, talk to me like I'm 5 definitions. I think could benefit the community, you know, and us long term. If everyone's gonna
Well, and it's
gloss
not
through.
a number that we're just drawing out of, we're not just picking,
Right,
like,
just
we
throwing it
have
out.
the data in front of us that shows us, that you guys have very specifically narrowed down. And like, if we do pick 500, which is like a middle ground, I'm not saying we do, I'm just saying, for me, that would be my, I could say that to the community, we picked a number that wasn't all in, but it wasn't depleting either.
And we may not hit the goal. We may miss the goal more often than we don't. But even being able to speak to that, to say, that means we might have, when you're in the community and in the grocery store and somebody says, you know, there's that roof and I was in the building and they're collecting water with a bucket, right? Like at some point, building a reserve plan like this, where as a board, you're driving this now. You're really thinking about what does that number have to be in order for us to maintain our facility, and if we're not maintaining the facility, you're able to come back and say, well, we don't have enough fund balance to fund our reserve in order to chase that much work, and we hear the community that you don't want to be taxed for. So this whole thing becomes a cycle that I think is a little bit more, at least for me, it's easier for me to explain the reserves if I begin to talk about, well, there was a goal. We hit our goal or we didn't, and how that then impacts what comes next. So I envision you being in the grocery store. You guys had tough conversations with community members. I envision us getting to a point where this reserve plan, on paper with targets, allows you to feel very in control as a board around the mission moving forward, what these numbers mean, and the implications that they have.
I think the community needs to know for sure about the idea that we're getting 85% back and how that works. Now, can you tell me again? So you have this capital project, and then how do you get that money back? Is that over 5 years, or is that over 10 years, or what?
So what happens is, so I'll use the current project
Okay.
as an example. So the money that was the local share moved in and was used, and it is already being used first. And then in 2 weeks, we'll borrow the first amount of money. So you can think that local share is kind of the down payment.
Okay,
And then the school will go out and issue bonds, and first construction bonds and permanent bonds. It'll be about 15 years. So we get the aid on most renovation projects over 15 years, and we match it as closely as possible to the interest and principal we pay back on those bonds. So, does
you
it?
lost me.
So,
Put it in mortgage terms. Like if our mortgage was $1,000,
so let's say you bought your house
Okay,
and you have a 15-year mortgage.
okay,
And every month you're writing a check for the interest and the principal that
Right.
you owe on there.
right,
So you've paid your down payment,
Right.
local share. You're now paying every month
Right.
because you borrowed the money. The
Okay.
difference is, let's say that interest and principal, that monthly payment was $1,000.
mhm,
Okay? The difference is, the state is going to send us a check for $850.
okay,
And we'll write the check for the 1,000 because we're from the local, paying from the local share. So 150 will come locally from the money we save, and 850 will come from the state. So does
And-
that make sense? So the mortgage payment still goes out,
Right.
but we're getting aid from the state that makes up 85%.
Okay,
of
and
monthly
for
payment.
how long a period of time?
Typically 15 years, and you ideally.
So the capital projects are overlapping then?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because, right, eventually, just like with your house, right, your taxes go up, but your principal and interest start to go down over the course of your loan.
Right.
And so managing those projects and the overlap is partly how you maintain stability
Right.
in the district and in the base. And the other thing that just happens is state regulation allows the aid to be reset typically every 5 years. You get an allocation per student. So the idea is all these regulations match out to give you the most stable system. And the fact that things depreciate. If you did a giant, you couldn't really do a giant capital project and expect it to wait until you paid it all off and then do another one. You know, the roots would be leaking too much in between, or the fields would deteriorate.
But when you ask the question, like, the community just needs to better understand this. How'd we do? How, that was like as clear as mud, right? Understanding school finances is definitely, like, there's a degree for it. It has its own certificate of advanced study, just in school finance. It's a thing. So even folks that study municipal law, because they manage villages and townships, and schools have a different set of regulations and laws that we have to abide by, and unless you are studying school finance, you're gonna understand only a quarter of what we're saying to you. There are a lot of things that we do that do transfer over to budgeting for any other business. But what other business, and I wish Mike Belichick was here because he says this all the time. What other business gets 85 cents back on the dollar?
Yeah.
We do when we're doing our job the right way. So how to help people understand that it's like a game of strategic chess around how we build a budget, how we fund what we're funding, how we do it strategically so that every dollar results in aid, at every dollar we can get aid on,
So,
we do.
so the aid, your 85 cents that comes back, where does
It comes in as a revenue of state aid,
okay.
and it returns into the budget, and then typically is, helps offset.
In the regular
the debt
budget.
service, yes.
So that's when you had the stuff for the budget, and they had something about, what line is that called? Revenue?
I could show you, but there's a state aid line that was
State
in the
aid
biggest
line.
summary line. And if you look at the state aid runs, there's different kinds of state aid, like aid we get in transportation and aid for general education. But building aid is a big line within the state aid.
Oh, okay.
And so anybody who wants to look at it can find the building aid amount number
We're
published by the state.
we're expecting it, so you see it in revenue. We're expecting that revenue. We're building a budget based on that revenue. We expect it.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, if it doesn't come in, we're in trouble because we were expecting it for revenue to match appropriations or things we're gonna buy.
Okay,
And in
Okay,
fact, I'll
that
just
makes
share,
sense.
it's one of the only revenue numbers that we know well in advance.
You can predict building
You
it.
can predict building aid. It's pretty much, and it's really one of the very few revenue numbers that we can actually project into the future.
okay, okay,
Let's put a number in there.
that's making sense.
Put a number in the box.
400,
400.
I was just
400.
going to say 400.
higher than where we were, but well under 700.
I'm all right with that.
400. Okay, we're gonna put 400 in the capital reserve box.
It's not on me, but
Listen,
it doesn't work.
Listen, but here's the thing, it may not ever work. But we should understand when we're moving money into a reserve, when you're voting on a resolution for moving money into that reserve, you will now understand exactly what that means for the capital reserve. We are on track for a capital project, and I will price it out for you so that you can see it. We're on track for a capital project of this much in this year, and in 2035, whatever that next one is, we're on track for a capital project of that size. We're dictating that in this moment. There is nothing wrong with that. We're being strategic and saying this is what we're hoping for. versus this is how much we had in fund balance, we were able to put it into the reserve, therefore, this is the size of the project. Like, that might still happen to us in the end, but with our stewardship, we're gonna start off at the beginning saying, we understand what the facility needs are, and so we're gonna set a goal for ourselves, and we're gonna chase after that goal and see if we can hit it. And we're gonna celebrate when we do, and we're gonna mourn it when we don't, and we're gonna then ask follow-up financial questions as a board back to the superintendent. What does that mean?
Now what?
What does that mean for us in 5 years in capital project? Right,
Dr.
it allows
Chanel, where's
this.
the 532?
I saw it.
Okay.
We're at a spot now where when we're talking about it in real terms around what are the ramifications of not putting it in there, and what are the celebrations when we do hit that number. I think that's as transparent as I can ask us to be with the community. We have to have this reserve, this is what it is, this is how we're gonna use it, this is what the target's gonna get us. When we meet the target, we're gonna say we're on track for a capital project, that's fantastic. When we don't meet the target, we're gonna say, ooh, what does that mean? Extremely transparent way to do business.
Is it something that can be adjusted year to year?
Of course.
We can, move that target, say, well, we're at 399, let's go to 425
You
next
can
year.
send me a collective email in 2 weeks and say, never mind, that sounded like a really big number. We're not voting on this. This is just goal setting. We're doing goal setting around our finances and the reserves, which allows us to speak about them very transparently.
We're starting the conversation.
We are.
So this goal, is still coming from the fund balance, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So in other words, you're saying, we're having a budget that we can say is as conservative as possible.
Absolutely.
We're going to spend money as conservatively as possible.
Yes.
And we're hoping that we end up with $400,000 at the end of the
We
year
are.
to put in for the thing. As opposed to voting for $400,000 tax.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct, because
Got it.
that is the other option, right? The other option is in 5 years, we know we need a capital project, we could fund it differently. We're gonna try very hard to continue building conservative budgets, administering them extremely conservatively, in hopes that in the end, I can say to you, this budget was administered conservatively, this is our fund balance, we are gonna be able to fund this goal. We didn't even talk about the rest of the reserves, right? We didn't even get to the
You
rest.
said this one was the easy one?
This one's the easy one. That's why we had to start with it. Can you imagine? Can you imagine if we went right to operational reserves? No, we won't. Yeah, this one's concrete. But I do think like in our future, we need to continue having
Absolutely.
conversations like this around what does that reserve mean? What does it do? How much money should be in it? And we'll continue to give you guidance on what those targets really should be. So did you write down what they gave us? Thank you. We are going to adjourn this workshop. We will continue talking about reserves. I appreciate you guys digging in deep with us and asking good questions. I hope it was great learning for you.
That makes
It felt good
sense.
to have a real conversation about it, so I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
It was
Any
very
final
helpful.
questions before we close up?
That makes sense to me. I
We've never
understand.
had anything like this before.
It's really beneficial to
I agree.
be hands-on with it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, we'll adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank
Good.
All
you.
right.